In this story here, our protagonist wanted to be an adventurer, but he had no talent at all. Since he was rank F, he was only useful for carrying backpacks. Instead of being an adventurer, the guy was just a regular employee, working hard to earn minimum wage. He wanted to get strong and impress the girl he liked, and in the middle of an adventure, they ended up encountering the Demon King. So that everyone could escape safely, he decided to sacrifice himself, but this act of courage caught the attention of the Demon King, who decided to make a deal with him. Since the demons in that dungeon also wanted to explore other towers, they gave our protagonist the power to summon them. The story begins with an attack on an S-rank dragon inside a dungeon. This was our protagonist's group, composed of several powerful members, and also his beloved waifu Saki. Saki, that girl right there, she's amazing, and it's easy to see why he likes her so much. The girl ends up calling for Yuki, which is our protagonist's name, and even tells him that he should stay safe. And the boy agrees. Everyone was fighting the dragon while he just watched, carrying the backpacks. One of the warriors strikes the creature, and Saki realizes it's the perfect chance to finish the monster. She was the most powerful member of the group, and with that she unleashed an attack called Luminous Slash. The creature was cut into pieces and fell defeated to the ground. Our protagonist blushed, thinking about how amazing she was. The dungeons appeared in this world, and humans with powers started conquering these towers to earn money, but they also represented a great risk, so they needed to be cleared. However, most adventurers only hunted monsters to make some cash. Only a few adventurers became heroes to clear these towers. And while he was distracted by Saki's beauty, someone ended up pushing his backpack. It was one of the group members telling that pack mule to hurry up and hand over the potion. The poor boy kept getting humiliated, even apologized and quickly grabbed the item. That blonde four-eyed guy kept saying that, unlike Yuki, they were the ones risking their lives, and that just because he was friends with Saki didn't mean he would get special treatment in the group. Since he was a low-ranked adventurer, all he could do was help by carrying those backpacks. Another guy told them to stop with that useless talk, as this was an S-ranked dungeon, no place for jokes. The two idiots apologized, but he also warned our protagonist to stay alert and do his job properly if he wanted to remain in the group. Admiring that warrior, our hero agreed. While exploring the dungeon, our hero said he was slowly gaining experience as an adventurer. He was very excited watching those high-level heroes fight monsters, and even felt sad because he was so weak, but he promised that he would become powerful and fight alongside Saki someday. At that moment, the beauty passed by his side and told him to keep his eyes sharp, especially since she didn't want to lose anyone else from her family. Yuki understood very well how she felt, because he also didn't want to go through that again. 2 years earlier, a dungeon had appeared in the city where they grew up. The orphanage where they had lived caught fire. They learned about it from the TV news, and they had only survived because they had already left the orphanage some time before. All the children they had grown up with ended up losing their lives. Saki had grown up with Yuki since they were little because they were both orphans, and he was even afraid that she might see him only as a brother. I don't know if in that case she could really see him as a brother, but we're rooting for you, kid. Don't give up. Now everyone he had considered his family was dead, and that was because of the dungeon that appeared in that city, destroying everything. Motivated, he said that was why he wanted to become strong, to prevent tragedies like that. At that moment we saw that he was being watched by a strange monster holding a chess piece, and the demon said he had found his final piece. And we saw that the last piece was Yuki himself. The boy turned around, feeling that something was watching them. And at that moment that one-eyed little monster cast a spell. It was a magic circle beneath his feet. That warrior warned everyone that it was a teleportation spell and that the demon was welcoming our protagonist. At that moment all of them were teleported. That arrogant guy started asking where they had ended up. The man told our protagonist to prepare the return item, and she noticed there was a red stain on the floor, and that stain started to bubble, catching everyone's attention. At that instant a demon butler appeared, welcoming them all. Our hero was already trembling with fear. They thought that butler was the Demon King, but he said no, he wasn't. Without thinking twice, Saki charged at that demon, and the others followed her, using their magic. They needed to act fast, imagining that if they took too long that demon could call for reinforcements. Saki jumped over the butler and used the Luminous Slash technique, but it had no effect on him, and the guy even said that young people nowadays were too hasty. Without realizing it, he had already summoned all his allies. That warrior was thrown far away, and an elf demon started laughing, saying that humans were so funny, and even looked among them to see which one was the chosen one. The beast charged at that proud warrior and kicked him straight in the face. The guy flew away, and the blonde four-eyed one was shaking in fear when he noticed another demon behind him. And to end the fun, a crimson magic circle began to form. They were announcing the arrival of the Demon King. Saki was extremely worried, thinking that would be the end for all of them. This can't be happening. I need to save Saki. She has to get out of here alive. The man was rising from the ground, and no one could react properly because of the fear. All the monsters bowed before the king, and after emerging, he began cracking his knuckles. That warrior knew that if things continued like this, they would be annihilated. That's why he needed an opening. but the power of that Dark Lord was too high. Our hero was paralyzed. He didn't know what he could do to help Saki. He only wanted to help the beauty, the others could fend for themselves. That's why he needed to act quickly to prevent that tragedy from happening again. He threw his backpack on the ground and immediately searched for a necessary item. And that item was the return item. He would do anything to make sure Saki got out alive. He pulled the trigger and at that instant the magic began to activate. He told Saki she would return through that teleportation magic. That way the golden magic circle began to glow. Holding a sword in his hands, he told the Demon King that he would face him. At this moment he farmed massive respect, guys, because he was offering himself as a sacrifice so that Saki could live. Laughing, the Demon King found that very amusing. The other companions said that this pack mule was insane and Saki already wanted to run to save her friend. However, that warrior grabbed the girl and even used the light steps technique to throw her as far as possible because he knew that if they stayed there everyone would be defeated. Smiling, he told Saki that he was doing whatever it took to ensure her survival. This is the greatest example of manliness from a protagonist, guys. This one earned my respect. The guy was a beast, the girl kept screaming in despair, and the man appeared right in front of our hero and landed a powerful punch to his stomach. The Lord asked what that insignificant human was planning. The countdown was almost over and laughing he said it was obvious. What he was planning was to buy time. And he even told the Lord that he was figuring out a way to defeat him. She couldn't believe she was going to lose her best friend and those monsters kept looking at him with disdain. In a farewell tone he said that it didn't matter whether he lived or died, what mattered was that he would save Saki. That warrior said goodbye to Yuki and thus the magic activated and all of them were teleported out of the dungeon. The girl tried to jump out of the magic circle to reach her friend but it was too late and he said goodbye to her. The girl looked like she was about to say something really important, but there wasn't enough time and they all disappeared. Mocking him, the Lord asked Yuki if that was how he planned to defeat him. The boy said that he could never ever defeat the Dark Lord since he was a low-ranked adventurer and also told all the monsters that all he truly wanted was to save his companions. He felt bad for leaving Saki alone but he would feel even worse if she died. Laughing, the Lord found that very interesting. Looking at the boy, he said that humans were indeed peculiar creatures. And extending his hand he suggested making a deal with the boy. What? You want to make a deal with me? Yes, exactly. Join forces with us and together we can conquer other dungeons. But why, monster? Why would you want to do something like that? The Lord said that they were constantly being invaded by humans. Yes, exactly. We do this to stop monsters from harming people outside the dungeons. It's humans who invade them, and in the end it's the dungeon monsters who suffer the most. And he used as an example the dragon that our hero's group had defeated. Yuki knew that this dungeon was S rank and was still under investigation since people didn't know who the main boss was. Then the Lord said that to strengthen the dungeon they needed to acquire more power. He couldn't allow his companions to suffer at the hands of humans. Upon hearing that, our protagonist remembered very well what had happened to the orphanage where he grew up and realized that the monsters were also victims of humans. He even asked the Lord what he desired when he said he wanted to conquer other dungeons. The Lord said he was willing to destroy other dungeons so that his own could survive. Yuki understood that the Lord was doing this to protect those he considered his family, and he remembered Saki. So he agreed to make that deal with the Lord as long as he didn't kill other humans. The Lord said he was only proposing that deal to the boy because monsters couldn't leave their dungeons in the traditional way. But the boy kept saying that he couldn't trust a demon. And the Lord said that if he didn't accept, he would be killed. Right there. What he was afraid of was ending up becoming a machine made to destroy humans. If he didn't want to make the deal, maybe one day he would become strong enough to avenge his own death. Or maybe the demon would grow so powerful that he could destroy the entire world. He was cornered and didn't know whether he should make that deal or not. However, he ended up agreeing. He shook the Lord's hand saying that he would make the contract as long as it didn't harm other humans. But he wasn't doing that to help humans, he was doing it to help Saki because he wanted to see her again. The monsters laughed, saying they were satisfied with his decision and that from that day on the boy would be their ally. A bit embarrassed, Yuki asked if he was really the right person to make that kind of contract since he was so weak and didn't even have a rank. Gripping his hand even tighter, the Lord said that was exactly why he had been chosen. After all, he had received the Monster Tamer spell and that could only be given to someone who had no rank at all. Now that he had gained that power, he could summon any demon belonging to that dungeon. And he could do it anywhere, guys. That's why this power was so broken. But he told himself that he wouldn't let those monsters take control of him. He would be the one to control the monsters. Meanwhile, the Lord was thinking the same thing. He only wanted to use and take advantage of our protagonist. That's because the only way for them to go to other dungeons was by being summoned by a human. For that to work, they had to find a human who had no rank and then make a contract with him. There were several ways to make a contract with a monster. One was by defeating it, or maybe by reaching an understanding, which was what had happened. But there was also a third way. Smiling, the Lord said that the last way was through magical force and ended up sealing the contract with our hero using his own mana. Yuki didn't understand anything, and meanwhile a mark began to appear on his hand. He was surprised by it, and the Lord said that from now on he could see everything Yuki was seeing. He realized that the demons had done that to check whether he was planning to betray them. Therefore, from that moment on, he couldn't count on anyone's help. He would have to handle everything alone, otherwise the demons would find out. After snapping his fingers, the Lord began casting a spell. He was going to send the boy back to the surface, and Yuki started shouting, saying that he wasn't ready to perform summons because he barely had any mana. But the Lord said the boy shouldn't worry about that, because he just needed to enter a dungeon and use the summoning spell. But wait, I don't even have enough mana to summon someone as powerful as you. And before he knew it, he was already outside that dungeon, with Saki completely desperate, wanting to go back inside to rescue him. The poor girl was crying in despair, and at that moment she saw that he was safe and sound, so she ran and gave him a hug. This protagonist is a lucky guy. Guys, you'll see. The other warriors were wondering how he managed to escape alive. The scene shifted to the next day. He went to the public administration building. The secretary asked if he had conquered the dungeon by himself. That was very suspicious, since he was just a very weak F-rank adventurer. To tell the truth, most adventurers below rank F only search for treasure. That's why it would be very difficult for our hero to convince others that he was going into dungeons to clear them of monsters. The woman also explained that all discovered dungeons were currently under strict restrictions from the Adventurers Guild. She then showed him an illustration so he could understand. There was a pyramid-like structure as a chart showing the ranking of various adventurers. He would only be able to raise his rank level if he managed to clear some weaker dungeons. But at the same time, he was so weak that he couldn't get a license to enter those dungeons alone. In other words, clearing a dungeon completely was so difficult that most people went in groups. He tried to convince the woman that he wasn't after money but after increasing his rank. The woman said she understood and began searching for something on the computer. She had found an F-rank dungeon called Silent Labyrinth. It was a place where beginners went to train. A guild employee was opening the gates so that he could enter. He even said jokingly that he could conquer that dungeon if he wanted to. There was even a safety button there because if he suffered a brutal attack he could press it. At that moment he heard the Lord's voice asking what he was doing in that abandoned dungeon. He's speaking directly into my mind. The Lord said that he could communicate with Yuki. And worst of all, that ability would always stay active, completely removing our hero's privacy. Then he explained that those abandoned dungeons were actually dungeons that adventurers weren't entering anymore, but that didn't mean they didn't have monsters. That's why he should use that abandoned dungeon to train his demon summoning. The Lord calmly said that since it was an abandoned dungeon, that meant the monsters were reproducing peacefully. But on the other hand, that was bad, because there would be so many monsters that there wouldn't be enough mana for them, and the tower would eventually collapse. While walking through the corridors holding the map, Yuki said he hadn't found any monsters. Even though it was an F-rank dungeon, that wasn't normal. It's this empty. At that moment the ground began to shake and he heard someone shouting, telling him to get out of there. Then the boy saw a couple running from a green slime. He didn't understand anything and even asked what was happening. The Lord explained to our protagonist that the slime was trying to devour the humans and that those two adventurers had probably invaded the tower to hunt for treasures. Pointing toward the exit, Yuki said they should run that way, and so they started running desperately, trying to escape from the monster. However, the girl ended up being caught, and shockingly she began being absorbed into the monster. The girl started screaming for her boyfriend to help her. Our hero noticed that the boy was weak, so he asked the Lord if by summoning him he could save the girl. But the Lord refused to do it. Yet the situation was critical because she was drowning in the slime. And without thinking twice, the boy jumped right in. I'm telling you, this guy is crazy and loves throwing himself into danger. Laughing, the Lord said that this boy was very interesting and that he already expected it, since he was very empathetic. He always tried to save people. The boy swam until he found the girl. That was the kind of man Yuki was. He always put himself in danger to save others. At that moment he decided to use his summoning power. A crimson magic circle appeared and a hand came out of it. Standing there was the Dark Lord himself. And upon sensing that powerful magic, the slime immediately began to retreat. However, our protagonist had very little mana, and just by summoning the Lord he started coughing up blood. He felt as if his entire body were burning from the inside. The Lord said that the boy shouldn't have summoned him. That was because the boy was far too weak. And at that moment he decided to eliminate the slime by unleashing a burst of power. He said that he would teach the boy how to control his mana and even place the spell on Yuki's hand. Then he released another burst of power himself, called Chaotic Wolf of Dawn. The power was so strong that it exploded the slime, turning it into fireworks. The girl was completely stunned and his attack was so powerful that it destroyed the entire dungeon. The tower was reduced to ruins. He asked the blonde boy if he was okay, but the boy shouted that the one who wasn't okay was actually Yuki. Looking at his own hands, he felt an intense pain and immediately fainted. The only thing he remembered was the couple calling his name before he collapsed to the ground. A few days passed and he went to the Endless Abyss dungeon, which was led by the Demon Lord. He showed his new credential and had been promoted from rank F to rank E. He even said that it was very humiliating having to be carried on a stretcher back to the guild to recover. But the Lord said that he shouldn't look so grim. He should celebrate. Celebrate what, man? I can't even summon you properly. I almost died just from that. In truth, he was feeling terrible because he thought he would become powerful, but he hadn't become powerful at all. The Lord said he was impressed by Yuki's courage. While walking down the stairs, he said he approved of the boy's bravery, and it was exactly that kind of strength he admired in humans, especially in our hero. He accepted the glass of wine and pointed toward his monsters. The Lord said he would need to train to increase his mana and become stronger. Next time he should summon Elvina, that undead maid, since she wasn't as powerful as the Lord. With a slightly awkward smile, he said it was a pleasure to meet her and felt embarrassed because that maid was quite cute. This guy here is shameless. The girl said she hoped it would be love at first sight and even joked that her heart was beating faster. But it was a joke because she didn't have a heart since she was undead. The atmosphere got a bit awkward because her joke wasn't funny at all. The boy even asked the Lord if she was right in the head, and the Lord said yes, that there was nothing wrong with her. Explaining, Elvina said that she was undead and that she really liked funny things. But she said that with a bored expression, guys. Then the girl explained that to be able to summon the Lord, he needed to level up. Only then would he be able to summon stronger monsters. She ended up taking him to an underground part of the tower and showed the boy how to use his own fists to defeat monsters. She kept calling Yuki master and he even felt a little embarrassed. While circling around the boy, she gave several explanations about what he needed to do to perform better in battles. He looked at her and smiled because there had been a girl just like her at the orphanage. He really liked those children and treated them as if they were his siblings. Except for Saki, he didn't treat her like a sister. That guy is shameless, seriously. I'm telling you. Sighing. He even said that this maid, Elvina, reminded him a lot of the children from the orphanage. At that instant, several system windows started beeping in his head, saying that he had leveled up. And the maid joked, saying, why is he upset about leveling up? And even asked if that was something only living people did. A little later, he asked if he could summon her for longer since she wasn't as strong as the Lord. She said yes, but he didn't have enough mana to summon more than 2 monsters at once. He even remembered that he had enough mana to at least pull the Lord's finger through the portal and make him cast magic. So of course that would already be a big help, right? But the maid said that he didn't need to worry about summoning the Lord because he could summon her. She was a very cute and also powerful girl. He laughed, saying that she was promoting herself too much, and even admitted that she was indeed very cute, which made the girl blush. I need to get stronger so I can summon even more powerful monsters, otherwise I'll never be able to fight on equal terms with Saki. At that moment they went to the boss room of that dungeon. She said that this dungeon was quite weak, much weaker than her own dungeon. So they could defeat that boss, and after punching that huge door, a big explosion burst through the hole. She saw the dungeon boss and even said that he really didn't look that strong. At that instant the knight stood up and Elvina charged at him, saying she would show Yuki how to defeat a villain. But right then, our hero realized something very dangerous was about to happen. He recognized that flame, so he shouted Elvina's name and threw his sword. The boy's blade clashed with the monster's blade, and that was enough for her to dodge the attack, though a small flame grazed her cheek. At that moment she backed away and Yuki asked if she was okay. The girl then asked when he had realized that fire was of the holy element. He had already fought other monsters with that power before and knew that undead had a weakness to it. Besides, Saki also possessed the power of the holy element. Elvina even made a little heart shape with her hands, thanking him for helping her. But still, could he really fall for an undead girl? I don't know about that one. At that moment that knight struck the ground with his sword. A circle of sacred fire surrounded them. The girl said that those flames were actually quite scary to her. He knew that if he summoned the Lord he could easily defeat that creature. But he didn't want to do that. They would have to defeat the monster, just the two of them. She said that her master was truly amazing and worthy of the title Monster Tamer. And with a serious look, he said that he trusted her power. Laughing, she said she couldn't let him down. Taking a fighting stance, she said she would fight alongside her master. The boy knew it would be difficult to defeat that monster with their current strength. However, the maid had a secret card up her sleeve. He warned the girl that he had been thinking a lot about that monster, and to defeat that creature he needed to use a new technique he had obtained. So he activated in the system window the technique called Evil Eye. Now he could see certain hidden information about the creatures. The maid asked what Yuki was doing and he only told her to be careful. That was because the monster had launched a burst of magical fire that was heading toward them. But our boy was clever and pulled the maid away. It seemed that the monster's attributes were quite dangerous. And analyzing more deeply, he said that the worst part was that it had a power, or rather an element, that was advantageous against her. The girl thanked him for saving her and even said that he was only stating the obvious. At that moment, the monster launched another burst of fire and she began dodging those attacks, then jumped toward the creature. She said that if she fought alongside Yuki, she could focus only on finding the weak point. She struck the creature's chest with a punch but caused no damage. Using the evil eye technique, he kept searching for the monster's weak spot. The girl said it would be very difficult, but he had just realized that there was actually a fire-type monster inside the armor. Yes, that's exactly it. Did you just notice that now? It seemed he had taken a while to realize it, but he said that inside that armor, the fire controlling it couldn't properly see attacks coming from the sides. Adjusting her stance, the maid said she understood everything and that she would try to attack from the flanks. But the monster wasn't giving them time to think. It charged at them again. He was managing to predict the monster's attacks and shouted for the maid to jump to the right. Then he told her to duck and then jump to the left. That eye of his could predict every movement. Next, he told her to strike the monster's head. And that's exactly what she tried to do. However, the monster counterattacked, forcing the girl to retreat. She even said it was a bit unreliable for him to keep calling out her moves. At that moment, he shouted again, telling her to move to the right. However, the creature tried to strike him and the girl had to save him by catching him in her arms. She told him to worry about his own safety first and the boy apologized. Blushing, she told her master to use her power to use her ability. What do you mean? A status window appeared saying that he could use the skill Wild Maid. She said that since he was a monster tamer, he could use the abilities of all the monsters he could summon. He had done that before with the Demon King's power, but he had gotten very sick afterward. The girl said she would lend him a bit of her power so that he could combine it with his ability to see the future and defeat that monster. She even made a cute face saying she couldn't wait for him to use her power. With that, he agreed and said he would execute that monster with the next attack. The knight unleashed several sacred slashes and she dodged to the right while distracting the monster. He was trying to charge his power and meanwhile she kept drawing the monster's attention. At that moment he began absorbing mana. The girl's power was flowing directly into his body. He fell to the ground and began coughing up blood as his body was too weak. But he stood up and shouted for her not to worry about him. And meanwhile he kept calling out directions for her to dodge. At that moment he felt her ability had overtaken his body, but he transferred all the mana to her so the girl could deliver the final blow. That's exactly what she did, kicking the monster and sending it flying to the other side of the dungeon. The impact was so strong that the creature was knocked unconscious. Almost dead, the boy said that they had done it. She told him he had done very well using her ability. And in a cute way, Elvina said that she would take her leave and bid him farewell. Wait, girl, I can barely stand up. He tried to summon her again so she could carry him, but he couldn't. A few hours later, he managed to return to the Demon King's dungeon, and he even expressed his gratitude since the king had helped him. The Lord said it was very good to see him again and was glad he hadn't died. Our hero asked where Elvina was, and the Lord said that the boy wouldn't be able to talk to her for a long time. That was because she had died, and he led the boy to the cemetery. The Lord also told him to say his goodbyes, and when he went there, the girl was lying lifeless in a coffin. The Lord even asked why Yuki found it so strange and if humans didn't mourn their loved ones this way. Surprised, he said it wasn't that, he just hadn't expected her to die. Then the Lord explained that her ability had drained all her mana and that she had done it to save his life. At that moment he realized that she had given her own life so that he could survive. Exactly what he had done for Saki. He rested his arms on the coffin and began to cry, shouting that he had never told her to give her life so he could live. But the Lord told him not to grieve because he was doing something noble, saving a tower from humans. And he also said that the boy's worth was great, that she had believed in his potential and importance, and that the responsibility for losing a member fell on his shoulders as the king. But Yuki said that the king was wrong. The blame was entirely his. He was the one who should have saved her since he was the monster tamer. He even remembered the little girl at the orphanage who looked very similar to Elvina. And that was exactly why he couldn't keep being weak, because people would keep dying around him. The Lord said that was why he needed to become stronger. Yuki asked what he needed to do to get stronger and even questioned if there was any monster capable of resurrecting Elvina, but the Lord said there wasn't and that they couldn't bring other monsters back to life. Well, actually there was a way, and that gave Yuki hope. A girl appeared telling the Lord not to be so cruel to the newbie. That was me, and she was the one capable of resurrecting Elvina. She even joked, saying that the Lord liked saying mean things to newcomers. At that moment he used his technique to see information about that woman. She introduced herself as me and she was the head maid. The boy saw that she had a skill called Resurrection Method. Laughing, she asked if he would like to know more about that technique of hers. Shouting loudly, he asked if she could really bring Elvina back to life. He believed it because her ability was shown in his magic eye. Giggling, she said yes, and that ability of his to see other people's powers was quite interesting. However, the system window showed that her resurrection skill had some restrictions. The Lord told me to explain everything to the boy. The girl said she was responsible for taking care of everyone in the dungeon, and she also performed a kind of backup resurrection. Hearing that, the boy didn't understand a thing. So she used as an example the dragon they had killed and said that she made sure they didn't die permanently. That's why she performed a resurrection spell. Well, if that's the case and you can bring someone back, then please resurrect Elvina. But the maid said that wasn't how things worked because her ability required an enormous amount of mana. She even waved her hand saying that if she resurrected Elvina now it could cause a major catastrophe. The amount of mana needed to resurrect someone like Elvina was equivalent to an entire tower. Does that mean Elvina is really that strong? According to May, maybe she exaggerated a bit, but several floors of the tower would still be required to bring the maid back. He understood that if the tower got smaller, it would be much easier for humans to invade the Demon King's chamber. That's why she couldn't just go around resurrecting such powerful beings. Wait a second, so wouldn't it be easier if you just kept storing mana and resurrected someone when they died? Wouldn't that be simpler? She said yes, but she couldn't resurrect someone if that person's mana had been completely extinguished. And mana took 10 days to disappear completely. And since many beings died inside the tower, she couldn't store enough mana to keep resurrecting everyone. Laughing, she said she had another idea. He just needed to clear a dungeon for them and use the mana from that place. He was shocked by that idea because he never imagined it could actually work. The Lord explained that their plan from the beginning was exactly that, to clear enemy dungeons and absorb their mana. However, she explained that those F-rank dungeons he kept entering didn't have enough mana. May also said that the other demons disagreed with resurrecting other demons. They were against resurrection because they believed it only caused demons to suffer, dying over and over again. But our hero was determined to save that girl. The Lord even tried to warn him that it would be reckless to enter other dungeons alone since he was still weak. He agreed that it was indeed dangerous, but he hadn't thought of another way to become stronger quickly, so he had no choice. Besides, he was brave, and that was why the Lord had decided to make a contract with him. The king looked at our hero and said that was exactly right. That red mark appeared again and out of it came the butler, and the king said that this butler would train the boy. Looking at Yuki kindly, the butler agreed, saying he would make him much stronger. He remembered that this guy had managed to block one of Saki's attacks with ease. May commented in the background that the butler was extremely powerful and that his name was Vincent. The Lord said that the butler didn't really agree with allying with humans, but he would still leave Yuki under his care for the next few days so that the boy could become stronger. The man turned and told our hero to follow him, and Yuki started running, shouting for him to wait. All cheerful, May said she hoped the boy would grow stronger within 10 days so they could gather enough mana to resurrect Elvina. But the Lord said that May should follow the two of them. That was because Vincent could kill Yuki since he was completely against allying with humans. The head maid placed her hand on her face and sighed. And meanwhile, Vincent created a magic portal, and so they went to the deepest parts of the tower. Once there, our hero was amazed as the place was a luxurious castle. Vincent said that the Lord allowed one floor for each monster. And besides that, Yuki was the first human to set foot on that executive floor. Then Vincent began explaining how the floors worked and said that each one had its own boss. The butler stopped and Yuki asked if that was where they would train so he could get stronger. At that moment, the butler showed that he wasn't really fond of allying with humans, since humans grew stronger by stealing mana from demons. He told Yuki that in other words, humans only grew stronger by harming monsters. And that was why monsters hated adventurers so much. But since the boy had made a contract with the Lord, Vincent said he would respect that and thus begin the training. The man tossed a sword for the boy to hold, and he noticed that this item was far more powerful than the cheap little sword he had been using. Emanating his aura, Vincent said that he should begin the training. He also said that the boy should try to withstand his attacks, and then he started attacking right away. What's your problem? You start attacking right off the bat, and seriously, he said that if the boy wanted to save Elvina, he would have to gather as much power as possible. And so the man began slashing through the air, creating small explosions. The attacks were so fast that Yuki could barely predict them even with his magic eye. At that moment he began emanating a crimson aura around his own body. Our hero gripped the sword tightly, and the butler charged at him saying the boy should resist as much as possible to gain endurance. At that instant, Yuki managed to block the sword strike and shouted loudly at the butler, saying he was willing to give his life to save that girl. At that moment he activated the second stage of the evil eye. He could see all the butler's attributes and realized that Vincent's attacks were aimed at trying to kill him. If he didn't block those attacks, he would definitely be done for. And once again the old man charged at Yuki, dragging his sword along the ground. He tried to stab the boy, but Yuki dodged, only scratching his face. Next, Vincent landed several hits on Yuki, but each time the boy blocked with his sword. Even the old man was starting to be surprised as the boy seemed to be absorbing mana from that floor. At that moment Yuki felt confident and charged forward, and the butler blocked, saying that the boy was making a little progress. What do you mean a little progress? The butler said his decisions were too slow and kicked him in the stomach, adding that even though the boy's defense was good, his attacks were still inaccurate. And the training continued for many hours. Every time he tried to hit the butler, his attacks practically deflected on their own. That was because his accuracy was so low that the butler barely needed to make an effort to defend. Until finally Vincent managed to strike the boy. He was thrown far away and started coughing up blood. But the old man was slightly surprised. That was because the boy's endurance was abnormal. Yuki gave a small laugh, saying that he had managed to see Vincent's movements with his evil eye. He didn't just see the stats, he could also see the skills and even predict the future. With a look of disdain, Vincent said that wasn't enough, and once again the old man charged at the boy. The battle lasted for several hours until the old man once again began gathering that dark crimson aura. Yuki already knew that color of aura was extremely dangerous, so he crouched down trying to think of a quick strategy. Placing his hand over his eye, he said he should gather as much information as possible to save his own life. That was the technique called Blood Blade. The old man sighed and got ready. Yuki was trembling all over, and at that instant both of their blows clashed in the air. The butler had won, and Yuki lay on the ground, completely injured. Hours later he woke up startled. He looked to the side and saw the butler reading a book, who said that the boy had finally woken up. He had spent many hours sleeping, trying to recover, and at that moment he remembered the end of the battle. He had almost died and would have, if not for May, who had used her spells to heal him. Meanwhile, Vincent was thinking about that last strategy the boy had used when he tried to copy the butler's own technique. He stroked his beard, saying that this boy was much more interesting than he had imagined. After fully recovering, the butler took him to a slightly more suitable training ground, and upon opening the door he found himself face to face with several monsters. That caught Yuki by surprise. The butler said there might be some monsters there, so he should handle them freely. Drawing his sword, Yuki said he hadn't expected to get used to this so quickly, and with his eyes shining he said he was ready for training. He thought he was going to fight all those monsters, but that wasn't what was happening. He put on formal clothes and started serving the monsters their afternoon tea. The butler was teaching our hero how to treat others with excellence. Moreover, he was supposed to be a refined man and not waste food. Besides, he had to learn to control his whole body, the butler kept saying. Our hero thought it was a waste of time and that he wouldn't get any stronger from this. But he ended up realizing that this tower had many different monsters, and all of them could be summoned by him. Guys, since he trusted Vincent, he said he would learn every technique the butler used. And he noticed that the man was indeed very elegant. He even tried doing it with several trays, but in the end, he dropped them all. Of course, Vincent didn't like that one bit, and there was our hero, crying. He could even use his eye to copy the butler's techniques, but he didn't have enough skill to execute them. After 2 days he had made a small amount of progress. The other butlers mocked the rookie, and even said they wanted to see if he was really that strong, since he had impressed the demon lord. Right? A bit embarrassed, our hero said he wasn't strong at all, and the big guy came charging at him, saying that if he wasn't strong he'd make sure to train him himself. But Yuki could see the monster's punch coming and dodged, then immediately counterattacked. The boy's punch was precise and sent the monster flying backward. By the 4th day he was being a bit more respected. He saw a giant lizard shivering from the cold and realized it thanks to his eye, which could read the monster's status. So he quickly grabbed a blanket and covered the female lizard. And she fell head over heels for him, seeing him as a handsome hero. After that he started earning the trust of the other monsters. Little by little he began to understand why Vincent had put him through that kind of training. And he only realized it because he trusted the butler. 6 days had passed and a cute bat appeared. He used the techniques he had learned to serve the monster, but in reality that bat wanted to suck our hero's blood and he was so weak that he fainted. He couldn't resist the little bat's bite. On the 7th day he was doing much better and even asked Vincent how he was performing in this training. While sipping a cup of tea, the butler said that he wasn't that bad. The boy was a bit disappointed because he thought the training would be only sword combat, not working as a waiter. But in the end he understood that this was meant to help him control his mana inside the tower. After a week of that training, Vincent said that now it was time for the final test. They would fight a battle, and Vincent immediately activated his Blood Blade technique. Yuki knew that technique was extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, the butler wondered how the boy would try to copy his technique this time, since last time he had managed to imitate it but didn't have enough mana to sustain that magic. Before starting, he said that if the boy failed to defend himself, he would die. Meanwhile, Yuki was sweating cold knowing that this butler was going all out in the training. He could see that this technique was called Blood Blade, a deadly one. But while holding the sword, he could see every detail of the technique, so he ended up cutting his own hand, saying that he knew what he had to do. He couldn't perfectly copy that technique because he didn't have enough mana to summon blood. That's why he cut his own hand. And at that moment he managed to block the butler's attack. Everything seemed to be going well, but his sword ended up being sliced in half, and he was struck by Vincent's blade. The butler said that was very disappointing since they had spent an entire week training. While the red liquid dripped, he grew angry, saying that he still hadn't managed to save Elvina and that he wouldn't lose. The boy placed his hand on that red puddle and used an even stronger technique. That was the red flower blade. Not even the butler knew where he had learned that technique. As he advanced, several other blades flew toward the butler. Even with a broken sword, he clashed against the old man's blade, and realizing the boy had made progress, he said it was very impressive. However, he had overexerted himself and slowly fainted, having reached his limit. He collapsed into the old man's arms and then Yuki's phone fell to the ground. He was leaving his phone behind as the butler dragged him to the infirmary. And on the phone screen was a message from Saki saying that they had found a dungeon he had requested. The girl was a bit worried about Yuki since he had seemed a little distant lately. "Yeah, girl, he just wants to train to get stronger so he can fight by your side. This guy's the last romantic left on Earth." The dungeon she had discovered was a B-class dungeon, and its boss was still unknown. The next day, he told the Demon King that he would enter a B-rank dungeon to gather mana from that place in order to resurrect Elvina. The Lord was surprised, saying that he had indeed grown stronger. Vincent said that the boy still wasn't at his ideal strength, but even so, he had managed to develop a decent sword technique. However, the Lord wanted to know if he could really clear a B-rank dungeon. To be honest, he wasn't going there to do everything alone. He was basically going as support, just like the last time he had entered a dungeon like that. Curious, the Lord asked who he was planning to clear the dungeon with, and he ended up mentioning the group of adventurers he planned to join, which surprised everyone. The scene shifted to the Adventurers Guild where he met Saki. The girl smiled brightly and even asked why he was holding a sword that looked so strong and if he had been training. The boy made up an excuse, stammering since he couldn't even speak properly to her. She said she was relieved he was okay since he had seemed a bit distant lately. At that moment, one of the adventurers called for Saki, telling her she should join them to raid a dungeon, but the girl said she wasn't interested in helping those guys. That was because she was already allied with Yuki, and the guys couldn't understand why she'd side with someone so weak. The girl explained to Yuki that those guys were leeches who only teamed up with high-ranking adventurers to take advantage of them. Mocking Yuki, they asked if he had at least reached rank A to be partnering with an S rank. But he said no, he was rank E, and even asked if that was a problem. Mocking him even more, those guys called him useless, and told Saki not to hang around with him, saying he'd only get in her way. The girl defended our protagonist, saying that he had managed to clear 2 dungeons on his own. He really had cleared 2 dungeons, guys, but not alone, right? He had done it using the demon's power. Hearing that, they all went silent, afraid to keep mocking him. The leader of those guys got angry, since his goal was to use them to clear dungeons and level up. But since that boy was a solo clearer, he didn't want to look bad in front of him. He kept insisting with the girl, but she said she wasn't going to repeat herself. And since the guys were so persistent, they all ended up going together, and Saki began going over the plan. That dungeon was B-class, so they had to be careful. Dungeons were ranked according to the final boss that lived inside. Since it was a B-rank dungeon, our hero said that the final boss shouldn't be that powerful, but some dungeons were ranked higher due to the difficulty of finding the secret chamber. And the higher a tower's rank, the more floors it had. Saki began explaining several things that our hero had absolutely no idea about. She also said that some towers were so hard to find the boss room and that they ended up being ranked S. Our hero said that they had been searching for the boss room for hours and hours. And she sighed, saying yes, that it might really be hard to find. At that moment, a giant worm appeared and one of the guys screamed, saying the monster had almost eaten his arm. He then slashed the creature in half with his sword and started showing off to Saki, saying he had defeated it all by himself. A bit annoyed, she wondered why those idiotic guys kept bothering her. Next, the man went up to our protagonist, calling him useless, and saying that even so, he kept getting Saki's attention. But right then, a giant stone golem appeared behind him. And not just one, there were several of them. Saki and Yuki charged at the monsters together, and using their sword techniques, they managed to defeat the stone creatures. The technique she had used was the luminous slash. That idiot was stunned, saying they were so fast he couldn't even see their attack. She told those guys they didn't need to fight. All they had to do was help investigate the dungeon. Our hero apologized, saying he wished he had synchronized his strike with hers. And when she looked at the rocks, they were cut in a perfectly straight line. That left the girl a little impressed, saying that he had managed to make a cut almost as precise as hers. He said yes and told her he had been training sword attacks. At that moment, she began to admire Yuki, since he was only rank E but could perform strikes similar to hers, an S-rank adventurer. And she even blushed, saying that he was doing really well. All excited, she ran over to tell him that he had saved her. That girl was in love. I don't know, huh? Even so, this dungeon seemed very different from the others. Meanwhile, those embarrassed guys were dying of envy since the boy was getting all of Saki's attention. One of them said that he was going to find the boss room and prove his worth. Even so, after 10 hours, only the 2 of them had managed to defeat monsters and find secret passages. It had been almost a full day wandering through the tower and they still hadn't found the boss room. But our boy felt that there was something wrong with that wall. However, the guy said that this E-rank didn't know anything because he was too weak. He even told the boy to stop pretending to know stuff since he didn't understand anything. He kicked the wall, trying to intimidate Yuki, and said it was impossible to dig through it because dungeon walls were made of mana and would regenerate. With his eyes glowing, Yuki said that this wall wasn't what they thought it was. The crazy guy didn't understand a thing. Using the power of the evil eye, Yuki began to see traits within the wall, and that was something he only saw when he looked at monsters. So he asked Saki to strike it, and that's exactly what she did. At the exact spot where she hit, the wall shattered and she shouted loudly for everyone to enter through that hole in the wall. And when they went inside, they were shocked. That was because there was a gigantic stone golem there. The extra guy was terrified, asking why there was such a huge golem right outside. Then Saki explained that in fact that entire monster was the dungeon. They didn't need to search for the monster because the dungeon itself was the monster. The man was stunned, asking how that could be possible. And Saki said it was because the ranking of that dungeon wasn't B rank. Yuki confirmed, saying that they had probably misranked the tower since no one had ever managed to find the boss room. Dungeons that were that big were nearly impossible to locate the boss room in, and that's why they often ended up with the wrong rank. Sometimes the monster would stay motionless, and Saki said that it was very likely that this dungeon was actually A rank. But thinking further, she said that maybe it was even becoming an S rank dungeon. They decided to take some photos to send to the guild so they could investigate more and learn about it. Since that monster basically was the dungeon, it didn't attack, it symbolized the tower's power. But of course, the two of them still found that a bit suspicious. And when they walked around the gigantic stone golem, they saw a floating castle in the distance. The man asked Saki if they weren't going to attack that golem. She said no, that it wasn't necessary. But the man kept insisting that they should attack the monster and destroy the tower first. A bit annoyed, she told him to stop being stubborn since he hadn't helped at all so far. She also said that dungeons weren't just places that produced resources for adventurers to raid and steal treasures. Dungeon monsters had clear strategy and intelligence, and Yuki knew that some of them even had feelings. They were saying that guys because they thought most dungeon monsters were basically wild beasts that couldn't think. After taking some photos, he said that he had already sent them to the Adventurers Guild. Now that the investigation was done, they could head to that castle to defeat the tower's boss. She told the other three to return through the portal to stay safe and not get in the way. And our hero said that he would stay by her side to help her. She was a bit surprised and blushed. And looking at her, he realized that this was the chance to fight by her side, something he had always wanted. She sweetly said that she would really need his skills and everyone she knew. He was the most suitable person to be her partner. Yeah, my boy, you could propose to her after that one. She even grabbed him by the clothes and said that this time they'd go home together. He wasn't to leave her behind just like he had done before. The boy agreed, thinking that he couldn't lose his companions anymore. Now that he was stronger, he wouldn't let anyone die in his hands again. But at that moment, the girl picked him up in her arms. Ah no, my boy, don't let her do that. What an embarrassing scene. And so she flew toward the castle. The other adventurer burned with jealousy and said there was no way he'd return to the guild empty-handed. He looked at the ground and saw a valuable mineral. Meanwhile, Saki said that they would take the shortest route. They quickly reached the castle, and upon entering, they realized the place was full of valuable minerals. They hadn't imagined there would be that kind of treasure inside. And when they looked deeper into the room, they saw a monster smiling. That was the tower's boss, an emerald golem. She kept saying that she was the most beautiful demon queen of all. Saki noticed several petrified adventurers and asked if the queen had stored their mana. The woman said yes, and that all of it was to maintain her beauty. She prepared to strike, and our hero realized that attack would be fatal. But she was incredibly fast and immediately appeared right in front of him. At that moment, he used the ability Magic Melody and manipulated sound waves to dodge the attacks. The queen's strikes were extremely precise, and he couldn't afford to falter. But compared to Vincent, she wasn't even that strong, he said. When he struck his sword against the golem's arm, she laughed, saying that his attack felt like that of a child. But that strike was only to create an opening, as right behind him, Saki was preparing to hit the queen. She used the blade slash technique, which caused a small crack to appear in the queen's stone arm. But she was so resistant that Saki said they would have to land many blows to defeat her. Yuki noticed that her endurance was comparable to that of an S-rank monster. And after a few attacks from Saki, the woman said she was starting to feel a slight pain. However, Saki grew worried, realizing that this golem's regeneration was incredibly fast. So she told Yuki not to lose composure or lower his guard. Next, they advanced again, and with a laugh, the queen said she had found a way to defeat those adventurers. Preparing her strike, she said she had discovered the weak point of both of them. Through the evil eye technique, Yuki saw that she was using an enormous amount of mana, and even Saki was surprised by it. The stone golem had captured those three men and crystallized them to drain their mana. Those guys were so greedy they had been holding the dungeon's treasures just moments before. Saki hadn't expected that the queen would do such a thing and knew that if their mana were completely drained, they would die. If those guys had gone back, they wouldn't be getting in the way now. The boy told Saki to go save those men, saying she could trust him, he would defeat the golem queen himself. The girl smiled and said she trusted him completely, and so she went after those guys to rescue them. Laughing, the queen said she would never lose to such a weak adventurer and asked where he got all that confidence from. However, he wasn't alone. He had many allies by his side. A bright light began to shine and he teased the queen, telling her to say her last words. The guy was fired up now. Startled, she asked where he had gathered so much mana. From that point on, he began to use his monster tamer power. He had copied that technique from Vincent and was going to use it to defeat the queen. After striking, he managed to cut off the queen's arm, but she regenerated and said she had already figured out his technique. She shouted that no matter how many times she was cut, she would continue to regenerate. Then, reshaping her arm, she said she wanted to see if he could block her next attack. But he managed to defend himself and did it easily. Yet, according to the queen, all of that was just a trap. But Yuki said that he had done it on purpose too, to make her get closer. The queen asked what the hell he meant by that, and he then struck her from close range, slicing the golem in half. The shards began to fall to the ground as he used the monster tamer technique to harness the powers of the creatures he could summon. Now without arms, she shouted that she would never forgive that pathetic human. But our boy said he still wasn't done. Driven by rage, the queen began to release all the mana she had stored. And then she revealed a new transformation, declaring that she was the hardest and most beautiful golem of them all. Finally, she said that once she defeated Yuki, she would add him to her collection of adventurers. He hadn't expected her to have a transformation. When the queen tried to hit him, he jumped back. She mocked him, saying he now looked like a little lamb. To irritate the golem, he said that she had become really ugly. And of course, she didn't like that at all. Amid the flurry of attacks, he thought that he needed to come up with a strategy to defeat her once and for all. So he decided to use that bloodblade technique again. He cut his own hand, blood splattering everywhere. That technique was very powerful but also dangerous to use. The queen realized that the power he was using wasn't that of an adventurer but that of monsters. The boy took a deep breath, and several crimson blades flew toward the golem. She screamed loudly, unable to dodge in time, and was struck by all the blades. Because of that power, he ended up completely exhausted. The cost of that technique was very high, but he finally managed to defeat her. The woman was left with only her head still screaming. And in a final attempt to kill the boy, she regenerated part of her body and tried to strike him from behind. But the guy was bold and said he had already predicted all of her moves. He even asked why the woman insisted on fighting him when she had already been defeated. Shouting loudly, the queen said she refused to be eliminated by a low-level adventurer. A portal appeared near the protagonist. He was performing a summoning and ended up calling forth that cute little bat. All of this so the bat could gather the mana from that dungeon. Then he returned to the Demon King's dungeon and explained that he had stored the mana from that dungeon inside the bat so it could be used to resurrect Elvina. The most interesting thing was that this little bat could accumulate an absurd amount of mana. It was also explained that the bat could restore a person's health by transferring the mana it had stored back into the injured person. He even came up with the idea of always carrying a bat with him so it could heal him during battles. Vincent said that was a good idea since there could be moments when his life would be at risk. The boy realized that this ability was extremely overpowered, and the Lord said that he would basically turn into a vampire if he kept using techniques like that. Turning to the bat, he said he needed to be careful because during training it had almost drained all of his mana and nearly killed him. Then the scene went back to hours earlier, showing how he finally managed to defeat the Golem Queen. Before being eliminated, she revealed her real name. It was Karate, and he introduced himself as Yuki, the monster tamer. And with that, he unleashed an attack that split her in half, preventing the queen from regenerating again. The guy was impressive. He was now even managing to defeat S-rank monsters. And that was because he was just a simple human who had made a contract with the Dark Lord. After defeating the queen, he could use all the mana from that tower. Once he defeated the queen, he released the bat from its summoning, and after using so much mana, he started to stumble. But the one who caught him was none other than the lovely Elvina. She saw that he had managed to defeat that golem alone and even asked how he had suddenly become so strong, to which he gave some random excuse. News of this achievement began to spread throughout Korea. The news said that only 2 adventurers had managed to clear an S-rank dungeon that had been misclassified, and the person who had done almost everything alone was about to be interviewed in front of everyone. People started going crazy wanting to know who had done it. Our hero couldn't take the credit, and the journalists said they knew that girl, she was an S-rank adventurer, so it was to be expected. The one who appeared before everyone was Saki, taking credit for our hero's achievement. People started calling her the White Flash heroine, and she gained international fame. In front of everyone, she began to give her speech, but honestly she didn't understand why Yuki didn't want to take the credit, since he was the one who had defeated the stone golem. Hours earlier, he had told her to take the credit, saying that he was embarrassed to speak in public. He even ran off, leaving her to deal with the press. He had made up an excuse saying he needed to take care of something very important, and she became curious about what it was. She even wondered if he was going out with another girl. No girl, relax, he was completely in love with you. He ran back to the dungeon and immediately asked Vincent if Elvina's resurrection had worked. May said he had arrived at the perfect time and the butler told him not to look at the scene because the mana would burn his eyes. May was holding a lock and told Elvina that her time of rest had come to an end. She even began to recite a spell. At that moment the underworld's blessing ability was activated. Elvina opened her eyes and our hero went to her asking if she was okay. She was still an undead even after being resurrected. With calm eyes she asked why the young master was there and even thought that he had died too and that they had met in heaven. But May explained that the girl had been resurrected thanks to the master's efforts. He knelt down and said he was very happy that she was okay. With a serious expression she asked if he was making some kind of zombie joke. And Vincent broke the mood, saying it was time for the two of them to get to work. My God, you're going to make them work as butlers again, but Vincent said it wasn't that. And May was already there holding his outfit. After changing clothes, our dear Yuki looked stylish. Wait, what's with this outfit? Upon opening the door, the butler said he was to play the role of the king. In that room there were several monsters, all eager to meet the new master, the monster tamer. Wait, what's going on? The Lord said that the dungeon he had cleared had so much mana that they all benefited from it. Thanks to our hero's achievements, May managed to resurrect more monsters, and all of them were happily thanking Yuki. They gathered to celebrate, saying that Master Yuki was a man worthy of respect. They wanted to hear Yuki's story, but Elvina ended up dragging him away. Thanks to my efforts, all these monsters were revived. Then he remembered what the Lord had explained, that he didn't resurrect monsters before simply because they didn't have enough mana. Back in the present, the Lord was thanking the boy, saying that as a monster tamer he should accept the demon's gratitude. He hadn't done it to save those creatures he didn't even know, but that was fine, he had done everything just to save Elvina. Still, since he ended up reviving all the other monsters too, he was happy as they didn't seem to be evil beings. He even remembered the time he lived at the orphanage with the children who loved him. At that moment, he realized that demons weren't as bad as adventurers claimed, at least not all of them. The wolf asked if this master was really Vincent's disciple, and our hero said no, he had only trained with that butler. The old man said that the boy still needed many other lessons before becoming a warrior worthy of respect. And the Lord told Vincent to stop pretending that he didn't like the boy. Come on, Lord, you stop pretending too, I know you like him a lot. The Lord admitted that at first, they only wanted to use Yuki, but in the end it was Yuki who ended up using them, and through him they achieved far more than they ever expected. Raising his glass, the Lord said that's the kind of man Yuki was. Because of his courage, they could rely on him for many other things. The scene shifted back to Saki, who was answering questions from some journalists. One guy was asking about Yuki, saying he was the real one who defeated the dungeon boss. He even questioned why she was hiding the fact that he was the true hero. Then that man found one of the adventurers who had gone into the dungeon with our protagonist, Yuki. He was beating the poor guy, and all the fool could say was that he didn't really know this Yuki, the mysterious man. Adjusting his glasses, the stranger said that the man he was questioning was a complete idiot. But at least he learned that the name of that monster-taming adventurer was Yuki. He had already looked into the boy and knew he was just a low-ranked adventurer. The cowardly adventurer said he had nothing to do with Yuki or Saki, but the mysterious mage didn't care. He cast a fire spell and killed the adventurer on the spot. We still didn't know why, but that man was hunting our protagonist. The scene then returned to Yuki. He was holding a bouquet of flowers. It had been a while since he had left the dungeons to take a walk through the city. He had even gotten used to spending time with monsters. After a long time, he decided to visit the cemetery to honor his siblings who had passed away. It was a memorial for the Great Collapse, dedicated to the people who died during the appearance of the Great Ascent dungeon. It served as a reminder of those who lost their lives that day. And every time he thought of the people from the orphanage, he felt sad. That was why he had become a dungeon cleaner, to make sure that never happened again. At that moment he noticed someone else there, and when he approached, he thought it was Saki, but it was actually that mysterious mage. He said his name was Zipper and that he had come looking for Yuki. Wait a minute, man, have we met before? Yuki asked. The man said he was only there to observe the boy, leaving Yuki completely uneasy. He said he knew perfectly well that Yuki was the one who had defeated the stone golem dungeon boss, and asked if he was also involved in the other dungeon cleansings. Yuki grew tense. No one knew his true power, the ability to summon monsters. He even wondered if this man had discovered that back then. He had asked Saki to cover for him so no one would find out he was the true hero. So he said he was only a helper and that his partner, Saki, was the one who actually defeated the monster. But the mysterious mage said that was a lie because he knew Yuki was the one who had beaten the boss. He also revealed that he knew the White Flash, the girl our hero liked, had been taking care of the other golems. In other words, Yuki, you can use magic capable of defeating A-rank or higher monsters. Trying to convince him otherwise, Yuki said he was weak and had only helped his friend. But the mage said that conquering dungeons wasn't some ordinary job, it took people with extraordinary courage to do it. In an aggressive tone, he said that if Yuki wanted to make money, he should buy weapons from him. Only then will you become strong enough to clear even more dungeons. Wait, so you just want to sell me weapons? That was exactly it. Zipper said that no matter how skilled Yuki was, he would still need powerful weapons. Stretching out his hand, he said that he himself was the powerful weapon our hero needed, and that if they joined forces they could conquer the world. Approaching the protagonist, he asked if he would agree to team up with him. Our hero thanked him for the offer and said that he wouldn't accept because his goal wasn't to make money, just clearing dungeons was enough for him. Spreading his arms, the man said there was no other choice. If Yuki wouldn't agree willingly, he would make him agree by force. He said he would convince the boy to join him, and Yuki was already terrified. Wait, is this guy really going to use magic outside the dungeons? In a swift motion, Zipper summoned a flaming hammer. The flowers around them burned, and Yuki shouted that using magic in the city was forbidden. Seems like you dodged my fire hammer, huh? Well, that makes fighting you even more fun. Stop it, man. This is a cemetery. Are you insane? Adjusting his glasses, Zipper said that using magic on the surface was illegal, but refusing his offer was an even greater sin. Then he immediately cast a stone prison spell. Yuki couldn't do anything and was immobilized. Mocking him, Zipper said that Yuki might be strong against monsters, but against humans he was completely useless. In a humiliating move, he covered Yuki's mouth and used an ice spell to freeze his face. Laughing, Zipper said that Yuki's ability must only be useful inside dungeons, then slammed his head into the ground. He was trying to provoke Yuki into accepting his offer. My boy, sorry to say, but that wasn't going to work. The man kept mocking him, telling him to ask for help from the guild or from more skilled high-rank adventurers. It was deeply humiliating for Yuki. Then the man stepped off him and said he would give him some time to think about his answer. The Lord sensed that someone was trying to steal one of his pieces. How dare this foolish human challenge me? The piece in question was our protagonist, who had to return to the dungeon to recover. Yuki used the excuse that he didn't have a sword to fight that guy. But since he was a low-ranked adventurer, he wasn't allowed to carry swords around town anyway, and even if he could, he would have probably still lost. The Lord told Yuki that since he was a monster tamer, he should use his monster's abilities whenever he needed to. At that moment, he summoned his beloved elf to help the boy. That elf's name was Machina, and she was an excellent mage. The boy asked if he was going to train in magic with her, and the Lord said yes, because sword techniques alone weren't enough to keep him safe. The mage wasn't very excited to train him, saying that he already had a master, that smelly old man. The boy said that training with Vincent had mostly been about serving food to other monsters, and we saw that she had a rivalry with the butler, saying she would be a much better master. She also claimed that even though she was young, she was a superior instructor. Wait, how young? He asked. She said she was only 200 years old. Quite young indeed. She said she would make him an even more powerful disciple, and that way she could have a child with him. She really was planning something with our hero, and he looked completely bored, saying he'd never do something like that. He was already rejecting girls, but that was because he was a man of honor, and his heart belonged only to Saki. She then took him to a library, and when they arrived he was amazed by the number of books. She told him that he would have to read all the books in that library. The boy nearly fell backward in despair, but she said she was just joking. At that moment she asked what the difference between abilities and magic was. He said he didn't know the answer, but started thinking about it, since he had never really considered it before. She explained that abilities work like personal techniques. Meanwhile, magic is a universal technique that can be used by anyone. Then he remembered the ability he had acquired, the Evil Eye, which allowed him to see people's information. The elf also explained that there were unique abilities specific to each race, like the little bat's special skill. And finally, there were techniques that could be used by anyone but could also be evolved over time. In other words, these techniques could only be used if one had a strong enough body. And the same technique could manifest in different forms. She even gave an example: an egg could become a chick, or a fried omelet. He understood all her explanations and realized that not just anyone could copy abilities right away. Since his body wasn't that strong, he couldn't yet copy powerful skills. Completely smitten, she said she really liked his powers and that she would make his body tougher so he could store as much mana as possible. So, she first needed to explain a universal and absolute rule. Magic is produced through chance and also through poetry. The boy got all excited since he didn't know that. But then a question came up. Machina said there were people who couldn't use magic. And why does that happen? He thought it was because of mana, since some people have very little of it. And the elf said that was exactly right. It was simply very difficult for some people to recite magical chants and create spells. Besides that, there were people who couldn't recite full songs. She threw a book at the boy and said he should learn the entire song written in that book. But he remembered that the guy who trapped and humiliated him hadn't recited any chant at all. Then she pointed out the third rule, saying that not all spells needed to be fully sung. He started thinking about that and imagined there must be some kind of compensation that allowed people to skip the verbal part. All cheerful, the elf said he was exactly right. People could recite magical songs only in their minds. Some compensated by using magic circles or skipping parts of the chant. The good thing about magic was that you could improvise it in many different ways, and the girl demonstrated this by conjuring a fire hammer without saying a single word. That was a silent casting done by visualizing the magic circulations in her mind. I know it might sound a bit confusing, guys, but it made sense. She explained that all basic spells didn't necessarily need chants, so he thought that he could use either magic circles or songs, and the more complex the chant, the stronger the spell would be. The elf said that now he should try creating his own magic. He could do that in several ways by shaping mana or creating magic circles and songs. He was amazed that she asked him to do something that seemed so hard, but Makin explained that it wasn't as difficult as he imagined, and even demonstrated how she could tame fire with ease. Picking up the book, he got excited, saying he would learn it quickly since he understood how it worked. But his master snatched the book from his hands. She said that even if he memorized every song in that book, he still wouldn't be able to cast any spells because he didn't understand what each verse meant. My God, that's true. And worst of all, I can't even pronounce this magic language properly. Unlike humans, elves had plenty of time to fully learn magical songs. At that moment, she used a spell that extracted the content from all the books. He didn't understand what that was for. Suddenly, the entire library began to change shape. Then Makin explained that this spell simulated and externalized the book's contents so he could learn more easily. For example, the spell in the book he was holding summoned a fire serpent, and she said that if he could defeat that serpent, he would basically learn the spell, and the guy already drew his sword. But then he was surprised, because she ordered him to read and complete all the main elemental basics. That spell of hers, which extracted other spells, was incredibly useful for helping people learn faster. And so the serpent charged straight at the boy. Laughing, he said it would be easy and sliced the serpent into pieces. The elf chuckled, saying he was doing well. Don't worry, my dear, we'll finish this quickly. 3 days passed and he had learned several different spells. He was fighting against a hawk and said that this wind power was amazing. The creature launched extremely powerful gusts of wind, and when he was blown away, the elf caught him with a magic hand. She teased him, saying he was one of the worst disciples she'd ever had. Even though he was technically learning those techniques, he couldn't actually use them. She said that while he had defeated several of her monsters, in the end he couldn't cast the spells he learned. Putting him down, she said there were too many elements for him to learn at once, which made things harder. But the boy defended himself, saying he could use one of the spells he had learned, and immediately summoned a stone arrow. When he fired it, the arrow fell just 1 meter away. He went there to check if his eyes were deceiving him, and the elf laughed in the background. Yeah guys, it looked like our protagonist wasn't very talented at magic. Chuckling, she said he couldn't recite the words correctly. He could skip a few lines of the verses, but in his case he couldn't fill in the gaps with compensations like she had explained earlier. He was totally discouraged, saying that at this rate he would never defeat Sipper, that mage who had humiliated him. Besides lacking reaction time, he couldn't cast spells properly because his mana was too weak. But the elf said that maybe it was just because they hadn't yet trained with the element he was most attuned to, and then pushed him with a gust of wind. Feeling motivated, he said that was true. Maybe he was good at some specific element. He even kept wondering if Sipper had some kind of elemental weakness. The scene shifted to a campsite inside a dungeon. That guy was looking for our protagonist since it had been a few days since he last appeared on the surface. But his companions said they didn't know any boy named Yuki. Then they remembered someone who used to be part of the White Flashes group and even mentioned that this Yuki guy was just a bag carrier. Wait a minute, until a few weeks ago he was only carrying backpacks and now he was clearing dungeons by himself. One of the adventurers asked Mage Sipper what they should do, and the man said that for now they didn't need to do anything. While they were debating whether to keep hunting for Yuki, something happened. The ground began to shake and suddenly a giant worm burst from below them. Everyone started screaming in panic as the worm lunged towards Sipper. The mage simply pointed his finger and unleashed an extremely powerful blast of fire. He defeated the creature effortlessly. The others said that Sipper was incredibly strong. If this guy is just an A-rank mage, imagine how powerful an S-rank must be. That's right, folks. He was only an A-rank mage and was already insanely powerful. He told his group that S-rank dungeons were far more dangerous, but they could earn a lot more money by invading them. As they walked, they encountered another group. It was a B-class team, and the mage said they were too weak. He said he wasn't helping these people, he was only hunting Yuki. The scene returned to the library, and the elf said that her first disciple was a failure. We saw Yuki completely defeated on the floor, saying that he had no talent at all. Truly, magic wasn't for everyone. Makina said he was a hopeless case since he couldn't even use basic spells properly. He thought the training hadn't been entirely useless because at least he'd gained some knowledge, saying he'd manage with what he had learned. Manage? You really think you understand anything about magic after all this? She asked. He said he had learned the spells, he just couldn't use them. But the elf stepped closer, saying that his training had only just begun since he hadn't truly learned anything yet. At first she was excited, thinking the training would be easy. But after seeing how untalented he was, she decided to push him harder, and she wouldn't let him give up. "What do you mean, push harder?" he asked. Pointing her finger at him, she said she couldn't lose to that old butler, and that she'd be an even better teacher. Since he couldn't use normal magic, he would have to create his own rules to cast perfect spells. The next step was figuring out how to use magic since he couldn't do it through conventional means. "If I can't use spells by the existing rules, how am I supposed to create my own?" he asked. Winking, she said she had a plan. First, he needed to use pure instinct to move his mana and rewrite the world around him. "Rewrite the world around me? How do I do that?" She explained that fire magic was usually focused on offense, and then she demonstrated by casting a water spell, saying that water magic was generally focused on healing. At that moment, the scene shifted back to the mage Zipper. He said he had found the tower where our protagonist was hiding and used magic to track him down. The mage girl demonstrated that water magic could also work as a locator and showed that she could see Zipper inside the tower. She got excited, saying that man was following her disciple. After unlocking a magical seal, she told Yuki that this time he wasn't allowed to rely on his summons. He had to solve this battle using magic. He remembered that fiery magic circle that had been used for teleportation, but this time the elf used a water circle. And so he was teleported to the upper floors of the dungeon. He couldn't believe his master had sent him to fight Mage Zipper. And when he realized it, that bastard was already behind him, taunting, "So kid, did you bring me an answer?" He was just about to say that his answer was no, but the guy didn't even let him finish and immediately attacked. Jumping backward, Yuki dodged the spell. Zipper said he hadn't waited for an answer because he already knew it would be a refusal. Then the mage tried to trap Yuki with a stone prison, but Yuki cut through all the rocks with his sword. Surprised, the cotton-headed mage said that this swordsman was truly impressive when it came to fighting inside dungeons. The ground turned to mud, and from it emerged arms that grabbed the boy. "Wait, this guy can use all the elements?" While restraining the protagonist, Zipper began casting a wind spell. It was an extremely powerful wind hammer, and it struck Yuki hard. The impact was so strong that he coughed up blood. That mage was so skilled that he could use practically every basic element. While lying on the ground, Yuki knew that if the battle came down to magical attacks, he would definitely lose. That's why he had to create a new spell. Zipper said that the boy shouldn't be looking at him with such an ugly face, but without thinking twice, our hero charged straight at the bastard. Stretching out his hands, Zipper created a stone barrier, but Yuki managed to slice through all of it with his blade. At that moment, he realized the man was closing in. The mage had his hand extended to attack at point-blank range and unleashed lightning spells. Thrown backward, our protagonist managed to stay on his feet, and the man didn't give him any time to rest, immediately summoning a stone spell. He knew he needed to become stronger, because he didn't want to lose his loved ones like he had in the past. So he advanced, blocking all the stones. Because of the attacks, the dungeon ceiling began to collapse, and massive boulders started falling onto Zipper, and the guy didn't even notice it. When he realized our hero had already used the distraction to escape, the boy was hiding behind a large rock. He couldn't understand how to create a new spell. At that moment, he heard Makina's voice speaking to him. The boy even looked around in confusion, asking where the elf was. Because of his monster tamer power, he could communicate with creatures through his mind, and she began giving him advice on how to rewrite mana and create a new spell. He should first let his emotions take control. Let emotions speak. The only thing he could think of when hearing that word was the children he had grown up with. The reason he wanted to become stronger was to protect the people he loved. And when he thought about Saki, the person he loved most in the world, his mana began to overflow. He placed his hand over his heart and felt it beating harder. The man shouted that he had found Yuki, but our hero extended his hand toward him. "What is it? Are you trying to cast a spell?" The man launched an extremely strong fire blast, and with glowing eyes, Yuki stopped the flames using his sword. The man didn't understand what was happening, but something caught his attention. Makina had always said that Yuki was a hopeless student when it came to learning magic, but after seeing what he had done, she admitted he'd had a great idea. He had created a counterspell. All of it was thanks to the emotion he carried. The guy was basically the Asta of Black Clover, and that shield of his negated any kind of magic cast at him. With the sword in hand, he said that he was going to finish off that bastard, but the man screamed that such magic was impossible. He wanted to test how long that shield could hold. And then he fired another lightning blast. And it worked, guys. He was managing to block all the magic. The man tested him with water spells, and again Yuki blocked them, but little by little, his shield began to crack. Yet no matter what element Zipper used, every spell was blocked. And of course that made him furious. Realizing things were getting interesting, the elf went there to see it with her own eyes. Normally, magic sends the user's intent into mana, rewriting the world. But in our hero's case, he did the opposite. That's why he ended up nullifying magic. The girl laughed, saying he could call that spell empty magic. Zipper got angry, saying that seemed impossible. He had never seen anything like it before. So he decided to try breaking that shield using his most powerful attack. He unleashed all the elements at once. Our hero knew that if he only stayed on defense it wouldn't work, so he created another spell, a void sword. That sword nullified magic and he cut through all those spells. The cotton-headed mage screamed, finding it unbelievable. The man was in total shock. Meanwhile, Makina kept laughing, saying that her apprentice had truly learned something. Now that he had both a shield and a weapon, he began to advance. The mage cast walls of ice and wind, but none of them were enough to stop the boy. While in midair he prepared to strike his enemy. The man shouted, calling the boy a damn brat. In desperation, he unleashed a wave of fire, but our hero blocked it with his spell-nullifying shield. Zipper realized that his mana was running out and that he wouldn't be able to defeat the boy. And this was Yuki's perfect chance to end the fight. He prepared to deliver the final blow, using his Thousand Blades technique. I bet not even Wi-Fi could pass through that moment. Yuki was already right next to him, and the mage couldn't block in time, so in desperation he cast a barrier spell. That interrupted Yuki's strike, and when he tried to hit him again, Zipper was thrown backward. I thought you'd hit yourself just to dodge that attack. Trying to flee, Zipper said that next time he would definitely defeat the boy, and then flew away. Just making the guy retreat was already good enough. But Makina said he couldn't let that bastard escape, because otherwise the butler would mock her, saying she hadn't trained her apprentice well. Looking at his hand, he said that he had a plan B in case of an emergency. And he even asked the elf if everything was okay, as he was going to perform a summoning. Zipper was trying to flee, badly injured, and at that moment he felt something coming toward him. When he turned around he realized it was a dark energy. It was a purple fire spell that was consuming him. The man tried to run even faster, and Makina realized that the boy had used an abyss wave, and he did that through the summoning of Mei. The head maid began reciting a long incantation. He explained that since he couldn't learn abilities, he ended up teaching Mei the spell he wanted to use. And the best part was that this magic was universal, meaning anyone could use it. At that moment Mei stretched out her hands and even joked, saying that Master Yuki was too rough with his maids. He said that since he was the monster tamer they must do everything he ordered. And so, Mei unleashed that giant arrow. Screaming, Zipper realized there was no time to dodge, so he tried to form a sacred shield. But our hero fired an arrow, and that anti-magic arrow shattered the shield. All fired up, Yuki said that he had already warned Zipper. He wouldn't let that trash leave unpunished. And thus Mei's arrow struck the cotton-headed mage. The man started screaming as the energy drained all his mana. At the end of the battle, our hero collapsed on the ground, exhausted. He even thanked the good teacher he had. The public defense squad went to the entrance of that dungeon to conduct an investigation. They had received a report that Mage Zipper had invaded it, and the complaints also said that Yuki was his ally. Yuki had captured that mage and after handcuffing him was taking the man outside. And when he passed through the portal he was surprised by the public defense squad. The agents restrained our hero, saying that he was a criminal allied with an evil mafioso. But our hero realized he had fallen into a trap, or at least a misunderstanding. The squad leader froze Yuki's feet. She was Nanab, the squad leader and a B-rank mage. But he tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. And when they saw he was carrying Zipper they concluded that they really were allies. Wait guys, we were just fighting. In fact, I'm the victim here. He attacked me. At that moment the bastard used a fire spell against our hero. The government soldiers realized that the scoundrel was actually fighting against Yuki, but luckily he wasn't hit because he activated his defensive spell in time. The man realized he had woken up at the perfect time, just before being arrested. He even tried to escape, but the soldiers chased him. The defenders used magic to try to hold him back, yet Zipper kept running. Our hero tried to warn them that this mage Zipper was extremely dangerous. But one of the soldiers turned to him and told him to stay quiet since he was also a criminal. At that moment, Zipper shouted, "Thunder Cry," electrifying everyone around him. And to finish, he kicked one of the soldiers toward another who was standing farther back. And so, both soldiers ended up crashing into each other. One of the fighters got up and went to heal his injured comrades. But then he saw that their leader had been taken hostage. Holding Nana, he said that the other soldiers shouldn't come any closer. That distance wasn't safe for our hero to make an attack, and he kept saying that they should release him because he wasn't allied with that bastard mage. I knew this guy was trash, but not to the point of taking someone hostage. With a crazed look, he said that he would wipe out all the enemies in front of him. And our hero shouted for everyone to get out of there because a dangerous spell was coming. He even placed himself in front to serve as a human shield. But at that moment, a woman landed right in front of him and said in a charming tone that he didn't need to lay a hand on that criminal. At that moment, she activated her ocular technique. He knew that girl. She was an S-rank adventurer. Her name was Jink, and she was a holy knight from the reinforcement squad division. She used the technique Eccentric Dragon, and Zipper realized that if that spell hit him, he would die. So he dodged that blast. The girl's arrows were like a dragon's breath of lightning. He also knew that girl. Jink, and knew he was no match for her, so he used a chain spell to restrain her in hopes of escaping. She told Yuki it was necessary for him to use his spell that nullified other magics. He didn't know how she knew about that power, but he agreed to help. And with that, he cut through all those chains with his void sword. Zipper realized it would be too difficult to fight against both of them, so he cast a rain of arrows over the other soldiers. Jink saw that those attacks were heading toward her squad, and the man intensified his magic even further. They wondered when that guy would finally run out of energy. It seemed like he had infinite mana. To block all those spells, he created an even larger void shield. The girl laughed, saying that this magic-canceling shield was very interesting. Damn it, how does she know all my techniques? Could she have figured out that I also summon monsters? At that moment, she appeared behind Zipper and struck him with her blade. At that moment, all the soldiers rushed forward to try to capture the criminal. She said that his fighting ability had been weakened because he had already fought before, and even thanked Yuki for his help, saying that he was essential. The boy asked how she knew about his spells and whether it was because of her ocular power. The girl said that her power was very similar to the evil eye that our hero possessed, and that was exactly why she knew all his spells and also Zipper's magic. A soldier went to the captain to report about the wounded and then turned to our protagonist, asking what they should do with him. But the girl realized that the boy had been on their side and had fought against that mafioso. For now, the accusations against Yuki would be suspended, and he even said that he could help with any investigation. At that moment, the soldier opened a portal and said that the dungeon Yuki had been challenging was an S-rank one. Therefore, he would have to answer to the guild, since what he did was technically a crime. The boy was surprised that they had discovered that. Come on, did you really think you could enter a dungeon and no one would find out? He had entered other S-rank dungeons before, but he was always accompanied by more powerful adventurers. The soldier said that entering such a strong dungeon alone was a rule violation. The captain said she believed that Yuki was strong enough to handle S-rank dungeons, and with a mischievous smile she proposed making a deal. Extending her hand, she invited him to help clean a dungeon. She wanted to monitor our hero to see how strong he really was. At that moment, he realized he wouldn't get a single day off. She said that as the captain she could decide what kind of punishment he would receive. And his punishment would be to assist her, since she wanted to see how his monster taming ability worked. And the only thing he could think about was what kind of monster he should summon to keep people from finding out the truth. Back in the Demon Lord's dungeon, he explained everything that had happened and said that if they ever discovered he could summon intelligent beings like demons, he would be doomed. He even thought that the only creature he could safely summon was that little bat, but it kept draining his mana. Then the Lord told him to talk to Task, who was that beast-like monster. He had seen Task a few times before, and that guy was responsible for handling other monsters. The Lord also explained that Task was a specialist. In other words, he managed the collective of other monsters. So our hero went to meet him. After training with Machina, now he would train with Task. The man was all excited, saying that now it was his turn to be the master. Yuki immediately asked if he knew of any monster that didn't talk so he could summon it. And the guy seemed to really admire Yuki, saying that he had always wanted to train him. He was even wagging his tail with excitement. At that moment, he grabbed our hero, saying that he was Wild Task, and his specialty was studying monsters, and that he would teach the protagonist everything about them. He asked our hero what he thought monsters were, and Yuki said they were just creatures that lived in dungeons, but Task said that wasn't quite right. Monsters were beings that lived off mana. Yuki said that humans also sought mana all the time, so they should be called monsters too. Making a heart shape with his hands, Task said that was exactly it. That's why he and the master were practically the same. So our protagonist began comparing himself to the other demons, thinking that maybe they really were the same species, and now that they were of the same kind, they would get along just fine. That's what Task said, leaving our hero unamused. But the strange thing was that monsters came in many different species, Yuki noted. But to the demons, that didn't matter at all. What mattered to them was something else. They didn't care about species as long as they lived in the same dungeon. Their true enemies were monsters from other towers. So you don't really care about affiliation or species, huh? You consider everyone living in the same tower part of the same family. Task gave our protagonist a big hug, saying that was exactly right. Okay man, stop being so clingy already. He said that all he wanted was a monster to summon, and Task told him to leave it to him. Then he presented the dragon they had defeated at the beginning, when they first entered that dungeon. And he said that the dragon's power was incredibly strong, but it seemed that the dragon still held a grudge against Yuki and even breathed fire at him. Task explained that it was because the dragon still held a bit of resentment, and drawing his sword, our hero said that the dragon could face him head-on because he was ready to fight. But at that moment the dragon turned away, saying it didn't want to fight him. Task explained that it was because the dragon saw Yuki as too weak and not even worth its attention. Seriously, am I so weak that I don't even deserve his attention? But Task gave our protagonist another hug, saying he shouldn't feel discouraged. That was because there was another monster, the Shadow Claw. When he saw that creature, our hero became completely excited. For that speechless monster to obey him when summoned, he would have to do one of two things: make a pact through negotiation or defeat it in battle. But the monster ran away, melting into the shadows. He was so weak that the monster fled, leaving him crying miserably. Task said it was because our hero had too little mana, and that was why they looked down on him. Intelligent monsters could respect others through willpower, but the ones that weren't as smart only acknowledged strength, and our hero thought that was really annoying. But Task said he would help him with that. Since he was a chimera, he knew almost everything about monsters. At that moment he began to change shape, and our hero found it incredible. Task had turned into that same shadow beast. After merging with the shadow of the first creature, he went there to hunt it down. After biting that monster, he began dragging it back. That Task was quite the character. Of course the beast wasn't happy about that at all. After returning to his original form, he told Yuki to fight the creature to earn its respect. At that moment he used his evil eye and managed to predict where the next attack would come from. That allowed him to block it with his sword. He even praised the creature, saying it was expected from monsters of that level in an S-rank dungeon. After getting ready, he said it wouldn't be easy to defeat the creature, and so he began battling these monsters to earn their respect. Task kept transforming into various other creatures to help our hero gain more abilities. He even defeated a giant crab, and finally Task brought a flying serpent. But our boy was already completely exhausted and collapsed on the ground. Out of energy he fainted, and Task just laughed. He even ended up summoning Elvina. She appeared asking about this sudden summoning, and when she looked down she saw that our protagonist had passed out. She even asked if he wanted to become a corpse too. He had summoned her so she could carry him back to Task's room. When they arrived, he asked how many times he had been defeated. Patting Yuki on the back, Task said not to focus on how many times he lost, but on how many monsters he had managed to defeat. He also asked a favor of our hero, to collect samples of monsters that belonged to other towers. If he could get samples of creatures he hadn't encountered before, Task could study them further. That was because his wish was to one day uncover every monster that made up his being, since he was a chimera. That was why he had such high hopes of helping our hero become stronger and stronger. Smiling, Yuki agreed to help Task. Shaking the boy's hand, Task said he was counting on him. After fighting various creatures, Yuki began wondering which one he should choose to summon. Task even said he could pick any monster since they were all strong, but our hero had another plan in mind. Pointing his hand at Task, he said he wanted to try something different. At the public safety department, they had found a dungeon that posed a threat. It was a 4-floor B-rank tower, and its boss was a giant spider. The time limit to clear that dungeon was 1 week, and they assigned our hero to the mission. He would accompany a soldier to prove that he could clear a dungeon on his own. As soon as they arrived, he told the soldier that he was ready. The man didn't have much faith in Yuki, since he was only an E-rank adventurer, but even so, the mission letter bore the captain's approval. He didn't know why, but that girl trusted this so-called weakling. An hour later they were already at the end of the first floor. According to the instructions, they had to cross that swamp. And the strangest thing of all was that the floor seemed completely empty. At that moment, several spears were thrown, and our hero managed to dodge them. Some strange monsters had launched those spears at him. He shouted for the soldier to fall back. It was a group of demon apes. And worst of all, those monsters acted in packs. They all charged toward the boy, and with a grin he prepared to summon. The soldier was curious to see what kind of ability a monster tamer possessed. And at that moment, the boy summoned the Shadow Claw. The monster was incredibly powerful and wiped out several demon apes. He also ordered his beast to eliminate as many monsters as possible. And that was exactly what the monster did. The soldier noticed that this monster, the Shadow Claw, was a rare creature seen only in high-level dungeons. Yuki was definitely not a weak adventurer like he had thought. Besides, he must have entered an S-rank dungeon to tame such a creature. He even remembered that his captain once fought S-rank monsters, but it wasn't easy at all. When they reached the 3rd floor, they found themselves in an ocean, and from it emerged a giant kraken. The soldier even wondered how he would deal with such a monster, since that shadow creature wouldn't work underwater. But our hero recalled the summon. Was he going to fight with his bare hands? And at that moment, he summoned another monster, that giant crab. Could he perform multiple summons? Then he ordered the monster to attack the kraken. The scene flashed back to the previous day when he had proposed his idea to Task. Since summoning consumed a lot of mana, he wanted to summon Task every time. But the guy would transform into those other creatures instead. In other words, he would end up consuming much less mana since he would summon the same creature multiple times. Task himself. The man said he had never tried that, but they could see if it worked. He even put on a maid outfit, saying that he could serve his master however he wished. And that was exactly what they did, since Task could transform into any monster. Besides, he would also be able to collect samples from creatures more easily, which would benefit both sides. Task said his master was very smart for coming up with such a plan, and so Yuki proposed sealing the contract. "Master, you are a true monster charmer." Thus Task accepted and they sealed a contract. Laughing, he said it was a shame he couldn't go around causing destruction in other towers. And back in the present, our hero was counting on him. It wasn't the real crab that was there, it was Task. And our hero trusted his companion 100%. He used the evil eye technique and told Task that the weak point was the monster's third arm. Thus the crab charged forward and struck the vital point. Without much difficulty, our hero cleared the third floor. And finally they reached the last one, the fourth floor, the lair of that giant spider. To get past the traps, he summoned the owl, which we already know was Task in disguise. He froze all those traps, and finally our protagonist activated his void shield. They discovered that the tower had far more than 4 floors and that the spider wasn't on that fourth one. The soldier even asked in the back how he knew so much, and he explained it was because of his eye. "Alright, I can already tell this guy is completely talented." At that moment, Yuki told the soldier to be careful and a snake ended up biting him. He even defeated the creature by stabbing it with his staff. And then he summoned that flying serpent with healing powers. The little winged snake flew over and began healing the soldier, who thanked him. He explained that those snakes struck very silently, which was why the man hadn't managed to dodge in time. His contract with Task was working perfectly, allowing him to summon the chimera in many different forms. Seeing how powerful our protagonist was, the soldier became emotional and even thanked Yuki for saving his life. Otherwise, he would have died from the poison. Removing his mask, he admitted that he had made a wrong judgment and even congratulated Yuki, saying he was an incredible adventurer, and praised him, adding that if he kept going at that pace he could clear the entire dungeon in a week. But our hero was planning to finish the cleanup today. And of course the soldier found that very strange. He hadn't expected that. "What do you mean? I thought we were only going to explore up to the 4th floor." After seeing that our hero had enough power to go all the way to the end, he put his mask back on. He knew that if they encountered that spider it would probably be S rank, and even asked if Yuki was strong enough to defeat it. Our hero said yes and even explained that he had already figured out a strategy. He had trained extensively with Task on how to defeat that spider. Since the chimera could transform into that giant spider, they had simulated that battle many times, and thus they finally reached the spider's nest. It truly was a special boss, and taking a combat stance he began analyzing the monster with his evil eye. The spider let out a loud scream and the soldier became worried. It seemed that this guy didn't trust Yuki 100%. They realized that the spider used its webs to control other monsters, and it had done this with several creatures. Little by little she began lowering the monsters to fight against Yuki, but our boy was prepared. The soldier thought that group was far too large. There were too many monsters for one adventurer to handle alone. At that moment he summoned the owl to escape that circus, and from above it seemed he was in trouble because of the dragon. But he let go of the owl, diving straight toward the creatures. The soldier shouted loudly, telling him to be careful since there would be no place to escape. But the boy was already ready and his hand began to glow. At that moment he summoned the crab again, and after landing it crushed all the monsters, leaving the soldier stunned. Only the larger monsters remained. But the soldier said that if the spider kept summoning monsters one after another, Yuki's mana would eventually run out. He released the crab and summoned another monster. The one who appeared was the Shadow Claw, which bit into that minotaur. He knew he had to take out one monster at a time. That was because they had simulated this kind of battle many times before. Task had mentioned that the spider's special ability was to control other monsters like puppets. But there was a catch: when Task transformed into other creatures, he could only use half of their power. Thinking about that, our hero began to meditate on another strategy. He even thought that the best option was to allow himself to be caught, because once he was closer to the spider he could analyze how her powers worked. Task transformed into the spider said that she could control other monsters even if they were unconscious. And when they're conscious, can she control them with full accuracy? Task said no, explaining that if the monsters were conscious she would lose some control, and when they woke up she would briefly lose command over them. And in that he saw a chance to attack. Back in the present he was surrounded by monsters. He had learned from Task that these non-speaking creatures attacked purely by instinct, just like the dragon had. The Kraken's tentacles reached toward Yuki and he jumped to dodge them, then used his blade to cut the webs that were controlling them. He knew this was the moment when the spider would try to control him, and that's exactly what she did, throwing her webs at him. Since he had trained many times, he knew exactly the distance her threads could reach. With the Shadow Claw by his side, he could go on the offensive. Secretly, Shadow Claw had gone ahead and cut several threads, causing the Krakens to move strangely. With his eyes glowing, he said this was the right moment. He summoned the serpent and it flew over, healing the Krakens so they could recover from the spider's venom-induced trance. The tower's boss began to scream, losing control over her monsters. He said that she could only control the creatures with full precision when they were unconscious, and that's why she began to lose control of them. In desperation, the monsters themselves started attacking the spider, and since she no longer had the strength to resist, she fell. The impact was very strong. He even told Task, who was on his shoulder, to get ready because the krakens were charging at them. And that's exactly what happened. But Task transformed into the crab and blocked the attacks. Our hero jumped high into the air. He knew this was the perfect chance to finish off the spider. And so he charged forward with all his might, using the Thousand Blades technique. The attack was incredible, slicing the monster into many pieces. Task even raised a claw, showing that he too had defeated a monster. Thus, the mission was complete. They had cleared the tower. The soldier was astonished, realizing that Yuki controlled not only his own monsters but also the enemies. "This Yuki, he's a true monster tamer," said the soldier. The man even told our hero that he would update his rank, but our hero said it wasn't necessary. But the soldier insisted, saying that he had the power not just to clear this dungeon but many others as well. It would be a waste not to make him rank up. Upon hearing that, he got all excited and thanked him. And that's how we wrap up this story. If you enjoyed this tale, comment Monster Tamer. Every time you leave a comment, YouTube understands that our channel is relevant and recommends it to more people. I'll leave 2 videos from the channel here that I'm sure you'll like. There's another one about summoning that came out this week. I'm sure this story will get you hooked. It's really good, guys. Seriously, I'll be waiting for you there. That's it for now. Thanks and see you next time, everyone.